Hello, we're starting a new topic of rounding today. So the things that we're going to be looking at in this topic are in purple here. So we're going to look at rounding a number to the nearest 10, 100 or 1,000. Then we're going to go beyond that and round a number to the nearest 10,000 or 100,000. We're going to be estimating and checking calculations by rounding. We're going to be rounding decimals either to the nearest whole number or to a given number of decimal places. And we're going to be solving problems that are in a context by rounding. So the first thing we need to think about is, what is rounding? I don't know if you've come across rounding before or if it's new to you. But when we're rounding, we are making numbers a little bit less accurate, which might sound a bit of a strange thing to do in maths when we're always talking about accuracy. But as we go through the topic, you'll see what rounding is used for. Now, we round numbers to make them a bit easier to understand usually. A bit easier to understand, a bit easier to imagine, and a bit easier to compare. So we're going to have a look at some articles that I found on the internet about Carrow Road Stadium in Norwich. So these are just bits and pieces that I've cut out of the articles. So I've highlighted the numbers here. So here we've got the stadium had an initial capacity of 35,000, including 5,000 seats under cover. Norwich won the game 4-3. The attendance was 29,779. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of numbers in each of these sentences. As we go on, we've got, at this time, the ground's capacity was 38,000, 10,000 of the more vociferous of the home and away supporters. So this is quite a while ago that we're talking about here, because on 29th of October 1938, King George VI watched 20 minutes of the home game. Okay, a bit more information here, that in 1956, the £9,000 that it cost for the floodlights nearly sent the club into bankruptcy. Then we've got another bit of information here found on a different site. The capacity, which is how many people the ground holds, the date that it opened and the size of the pitch. It's been an all-seated stadium since 1992. This is the current capacity here. That's the amount of seats they've got now. Record attendance. In the days when fans could stand on terraces, Carrow Road saw a crowd of 43,984 in 1963. So the question I want to ask about these numbers is, do you think they're all exact? So looking at these numbers, going from the beginning again, the stadium had an initial capacity of 35,000, including 5,000 seats under cover. Do you think there were exactly 35,000 as a capacity? And do you think there were exactly 5,000 seats under cover? I think it's probably unlikely that there were exactly 5,000 seats under cover. Okay, I think it would be quite unusual. And to be honest, it would be as likely for there to be 4,997 as there would be 5,000. 5,000, remember, is just a number. So it might be that these numbers have been rounded. We don't know. This one, do you think this has been rounded? Do you think Norwich did win the game 4-3? Or do you think that it was about 4-3? Well, that would be exact, wasn't it? That's not been rounded. And again, we've got the attendance, 29,779. So that's not rounded, is it? Because that's an exact amount. And again, when we look down, when we see 38,000 for the capacity and the 10,000 extra spaces, they're probably rounded. Okay? In a date, that's not going to be rounded, is it? Because that would be the 29th of October in 1938. But do you think King George watched exactly 20 minutes of the home game? Is it possible that he watched 19 and a half minutes or maybe 21 minutes? We're not sure. So it's fairly unlikely, I would say, that a stopwatch went off at 20 minutes and then he went, right, I'm not watching anymore. I would expect that this £9,000 has been rounded as well. It probably wasn't at a cost of exactly £9,000. Then looking on, this is information from the club's website. So capacity 27,244, that hasn't been rounded. The date that it was opened hasn't been rounded. And the pitch size looks quite exact as well. Okay, and then in this paragraph here, we've got numbers that are all exact as well. None of those look like they've been rounded. Okay, so we're going to look at how you round numbers. And as we go through, I'll point out situations where this might be a useful thing to do. Okay, so to start with, we're going to look at rounding to the nearest 10. Now what that means is we are going to pick the number in the 10 times table that is closest to our number. That's what rounding to the nearest 10 is. It's picking the number in the 10 times table that's closest to the number you've got. Okay, so if we look at these diagrams, if you're working from home, you'll have this on your sheet that I sent home. So in the first one, we've got an arrow where the number 12 would be in between 10 and 20. So which of the numbers, 10 or 20, is 12 closest to? Well, we can see that in the picture, can't we? That 12 is closest to 10. So if we rounded 12 to the nearest 10, it would be 10. Okay. Next one, we're looking at 77, which is between 70 and 80. So which end of the 70 to 80 line is 77 closest to? Well, we can see it's closest to this end. So if we rounded 77 to the nearest 10, we're going to get 80. And we don't write equals here because 12 is clearly not equal to 10 and 77 is not equal to 80. So we're using arrows instead of an equals sign. Looking at the next one, we've got 50 and 60. 58 is marked. Is 58 closer to the 50 end or the 60 end? Well, we can see again quite clearly that that is closest to the 60 end. Now, here comes a question. What do we do when we're exactly halfway in between when we're rounding? Well, we've got to have a rule, haven't we? We can't just sometimes go that way and sometimes go that way. So what we do is we look at all the digits that a number could end with. So a number will end with either a 0, a 1, a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9. So for example, if we were looking in the 60s, we'd have 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, etc. Okay, now we've got 10 numbers in this list. So if we split that list in half, so there are 5 numbers on each side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 5 on the other side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can see that we've got an equal amount of numbers on both sides. So we make the decision in maths, or the rule is that if your number ends with a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3 or a 4, it's the number in the 10 times table that's below the number we started with. And if it ends with a 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, we go to the number in the 10 times table that's just above it. Okay, so for this one, 35, because it ends in a 5, it's on this side of the line, so we round that up to the next number in the 10 times table. So the next number in the 10 times table after 35 is 40. So 35 gets rounded to 40. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of practice just now. We're going to round these numbers to the nearest 10 using our information above. Okay, we don't need to draw out the numbers. So we're starting with 18. So we're rounding to the nearest 10. So we're looking for the numbers in the 10 times table that are either side of 18. So 18 is in between, excuse me, in between 10 and 20. And because we've got an 8 here, that's on this side, so we round it to the higher number, which is 20. Okay. 32 is in between 30 and 40. So the 2 tells us that we're in this side, so we're rounding down, so we're going to 30, not 40. I'm going to change this number now to 341, okay? And the number 341, if we look at the 10 times table, remember they end in a 0, so it would be in between 340 and 350. So the 1 at the end tells us we round down, so it's the 340 that we're going to write down. Okay. I'm going to change this number as well to 256. And we're going to think about the numbers that are in the 10 times table that are either side of 256. So what we're going to think about for a slightly different way of looking at this as well, to help you when you get on to doing some practice yourself, is we think about the tens digit. So here is the tens digit. So that is, when we're rounding to the nearest 10, that's the digit that we're deciding, does it stay as it is, in which case the answer would be 250, or do we move it up one, making it 260? And it's the number on the end, it's the 6 that tells us whether we leave the 5 as it is or move it up to a 6. So because 6 is in this side, this set of numbers, then it tells us to round up. So we change the 5 up 1 to make it a 6. Oops. So that would become 260. But do remember, when you're rounding to the nearest 10, your answer has to be in the 10 times table. So you can't just write down the 2 and the 6 from this. You have to have that 0 on the end. Otherwise you're changing the number completely and you haven't rounded at all, you've just changed it. Okay, so what I'd like you to do just now is pause the video and have a go at rounding these numbers to the nearest 10. Now, I know there are a lot of numbers there. You don't have to do them all. You can pick some of them to do. I think you need to do at least 10 to make sure you've practiced enough and got the hang of them. So it's up to you which ones you pick. But don't just pick the first ones, because you need to be able to do all kinds of numbers. So challenge yourself a bit. Pause the video, round some of those numbers to the nearest 10. You might get time to do them all. It's up to you, but I want you to do at least 10 for practice. And here are your answers. So again, pause the video and check your answers. And if there's any that you're not sure about, if any of these answers surprised you, or if you can't understand why any of these answers are what they are, then pop back into the lesson and ask me, or you can ask somebody nearby. Right, that was rounding to the nearest 10. Now we're going on to rounding to the nearest 100 or 1,000. Once you've got the hang of rounding, it's the same process applied in different situations. Okay, so we're again going to look at what number the arrow's closest to, and then we're going to look at how we round. Okay, so in the first one, we can see that this arrow is closest to this end of the line. Now, we've got 100 and 200. If we're rounding to the nearest 100 to start with, I'm just going to write that down there. If we're rounding to the nearest 100, then we need the number that is in the 100 times table. So 100, 200, 300, and so on, we get to 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, etc. So any number in the 100 times table ends with 2 zeros. That's how we can spot a number in the 100 times table. So when we're looking at 115, we can see it's closer to 100 than 200. So if we round 115 to the nearest 100, it becomes 100. Okay, looking at the next one, we've got the number 738. So the hundreds that 738 is in between are 700 and 800. So we can see it's quite close to the middle, but it's nearer to this end. So 738, rounding to the nearest 100, rounds to 700. Okay, next one. We've got 396. Well, that's right at the right-hand end here, isn't it? Just before 400. So it's in between 300 and 400, but we can clearly see that it's closer to 400. And then the last one, 934. Well, it's to the left of the middle, so we can see that it's closer to 900 than it is to 1,000. Okay, so we're just going to practice now. Remember our rule from before, that if your important number, I'll show you that in a minute, is a 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4, we round down. And if it's 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9, we round up. So I would like us to get into this habit of looking at our numbers. So if we're rounding to the nearest 100, I want us to pick the hundreds digit out in the number that we're going to round. Okay? So sometimes it helps you to say the number out loud and listen to what you're saying. 3,275. So if you listen, 3,200. So the 2 is the hundreds digit. Okay? So I'm going to underline the hundreds digit and I'm going to circle the one that follows it. Okay? So we're deciding if this 2 will stay as a 2. So it's either going to be 3,200 or it's going to be 3,300. And the 7 tells us what to do. So we have a look here. And the 7 is in the right-hand side of these. So we're rounding up, which means that that 2 changes to a 3. So we've got 3,300. Okay, now remember what I said before, these zeros are incredibly important. In fact, without them, you've just got completely the wrong answer. You might as well not do any rounding if you're going to forget to put the zeros on, because it's nowhere near correct. All right, so when we're rounding, we're finding an approximate number that is close to our original number. And if we wrote down 33, 33 is nowhere near close to 3,275, is it? Whereas 3,300 is very close. All right, the next one. So same deal every time. Pick out the hundreds digit. So 481. So the 4 is the hundreds digit, and the number following that tells us whether we're rounding up or down. So the 8 tells us that we're rounding up because it's in this side. So the 4 changes to a 5. So we get 500. Okay, and again, those zeros there are incredibly important because 481 is between 400 and 500. Then 5,309. 309. So the 3 is the hundreds digit and the 0 tells us whether we leave the 3 as it is or whether we move it up to a 4. And we can see again from here, there's 0 right at the bottom. So that stays as a 3. So this time our number is 5,300. Next, 1,984. So this is our hundreds digit. This tells us to leave it or move it up 1. So because 8 is in the right hand side of those numbers, we need to move the 9 up 1. but we can't write a 10 instead of the 9. Remember, when 9 moves up 1, it adds a 1 on in the next column, doesn't it? So it's adding a 1 on here. So we could look at it that the number after 19 is 20. Okay, so 1984 is in between 1900 and 2000, because that's 2000 is the next number on in the 100 times table. So we can see that 1984 moves up to 2000, because effectively the 9 moves up 1, which causes this to move up 1 as well. So that makes that 20 or 20, and then we still need our 2 zeros on the end. Okay, next one, 48. So where's the hundreds digit in 48? Well, it's there, isn't it? There's no hundreds. So we either leave the 0 as it is, or we move it up 1. But the 4 tells us to leave it as it is. So 48 to the nearest 100, remember that 48 is in between 0 and 100, isn't it, on the 100 times table? And it's closer to 0. So when you round 48 to the nearest 100, you get 0. Okay. Similar, we've got 74 now, so we've got no hundreds. That's our hundreds digit. But the 7 tells you to move the 0 up 1. So you get 100. Okay, but we again can see that that would be a sensible thing to say, because 74 is in between 0 and 100, and it's closer to the 100 end. Now I would like you to pause the video again and round each of these numbers to the nearest 100. So remember, what you're doing each time is picking out the hundreds digit and just circle the one after it and decide what that one tells you to do, whether you leave the original one as it is or you move it up 1. Okay, so in 180 then, the 8 tells you to round the 1 up, so that would make it 2, and remember you need the 0 for 100. So like the last lot, you don't need to do all of these. I would say do at least 10. Choose ones that look different, ones that might challenge you. If you're not sure, you can ask for help. But pause the video, do the questions. Now I'm going to show you the answers. Pause the video again and check your work. Remember to get back to your teacher or to the adults around you if you're surprised or confused by any of the answers. Our last task for today is to go on to rounding to the nearest 1000. Okay, so remember thousands. If we think about our columns, we've got units, tens, hundreds, thousands. So it's the 4th digit in from the right hand side when we've not got any decimals. Okay, so as well, remember I told you, if you say the number out loud and listen to what you're saying, that can help you tell which is which digit. Okay, so our first number is 4,289. So 4,000. When we're rounding numbers to the nearest 1,000, we need to think about numbers that are in the 1,000 times table. And all the numbers in the 1,000 times table are going to be ending with 3 zeros, apart from 0, of course, because that's just 1 0. We don't need several zeros with that, do we? So when we look at the first one, 4,289, then it's the 4 that's the 1,000 digit, and the 2 is going to tell us whether we leave the 4 as it is or whether we move it up to a 5. So the 2, remember, we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, round down, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, round up. So the 2 tells us to round down or to leave the 4 as it is. So it's 4,000. Because 4,289 is in between 4,000 and 5,000. The next one, 16,541. So to identify the thousands digit, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th one in there. So it's the 6 that's the thousands digit, and the 5 tells us whether we leave it as a 6 or whether we change it to a 7. So the 5 is in the second half, the upper part of these numbers. So 5's there, so we round up. So the 6 needs to be rounded up to a 7. So we get 17000, because 16,541 is in between 16,000 and 17,000. Okay, next one, 29,825. So count 4 digits in from your units. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 9 is the thousands digit. And the 8 tells us whether we round the 9 up or whether we leave it as it is. So 8 tells us to round up. So the 9 needs moving up 1. But remember, to move the 9 up 1, you need to be affecting the number in front of that as well. So 29,000 turns into 30,000. So the 29 turns into 30. And remember, it's got to be a number of thousands. Okay. 643, well, we've got no thousands there. So the thousands digit at the moment is 0, but the 6 tells us to move it up 1. So that becomes 1,000. So 643 is in between 0 and 1,000, and it's closer to 1,000. But when we look at 499, again, we've got no thousands, and the 4 tells us whether to leave it at no thousands or move it up to 1,000. And because 4 is in this left-hand set here, then we have to leave the 0 as a 0. So it's just no thousands, which is just 0. Okay, so I want you to now practice rounding each number to the nearest thousand. I'd like you to pause the video again and round each of these numbers to the nearest thousand. I'm just going to pick one to show you as an example. Again, you don't have to do all of these, but I would like you to do at least 10 of them. Okay, I'm just going to pick O here. We're going to do this one together. So remember, first job is to identify the thousands digit. So 9,081. The 9 is the thousands digit, and it's the 0 that's going to tell us whether we leave it as a 9 or whether we move it up. Now, when we move up 9, we move it to 10, remember. So the 0, though, tells us to leave the 9 as it is. So this one is just 9,000. Okay, let me pick another one just to show you, just similar one here. So 9,090, again, identify your thousands digit, and the one next to it tells you whether to leave it or move it up. And just be very aware that any numbers that come after that, so if we pick out our thousands digit and identify the one after as the one that's the influencer, it doesn't matter what comes after that. So that 9 here is not relevant to this rounding in this question. Okay, you only are being influenced by the number that follows the thousands digit. Okay, so try these, at least 10 of them, or as many as you've got time to do beyond 10, and I'll give you the answers in just a moment when you're ready to restart the video. Here we are with the answers. Again, give me or your teacher a shout if you're not sure about any of those. And that's the end of this lesson. So let's have a look at what we've done this lesson. We have learned to round a number to the nearest 10, 100 or 1,000. So we can tick that one off. The next thing that we're going to be going on to next lesson is rounding decimals. We're going to look at this. And then in the third lesson, we're going to look at estimating, checking and solving context problems, okay? And we'll look a bit at rounding to bigger numbers. Okay, so well done for now, and I'll see you soon.